Greetings, friends. Yusuke here, and this is the 2-week special weekly episodes of the Russian-Ukrainian War for the weeks of March 2nd through March 15th of 2026. The reason why, and if you want to continue receiving these weekly Russian-Ukrainian updates, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Now, the reason why it's 2 weeks instead of one is because literally nothing has happened. Well, some things have happened, but like literally, I had to wait 2 weeks to have there be enough info to give you guys. The first week of March, there was barely anything. The second week of March too, but there's been enough coming after these 2 weeks where I can make a video. And to spice it up a little bit, I think what I'm going to do this week as well for this video is also talk about what the plans are for the Russians and Ukrainians for the 2026 campaign. And the reason why there's been a slowdown in operations is because the springtime is literally like the worst time you could fight in this type of war. The summertime is the reason why the summer is really good is because when the Russians or the Ukrainians advance, they're able, with these infiltration tactics, they're able to hide in like these giant overgrown forests, ravines, tree lines, which are growing because it's summertime. Things are in bloom. And so there's a lot more areas you can infiltrate, hide, and do offensive actions the way this war has kind of devolved to, or has evolved, how it's all kind of putting together. So the way this war is operated, the summertime is the best time to attack, and also the fall time because you still have, there's still growth. Now in the wintertime, I say, well, what about the winter? There's nothing on there. Now the thing about winter is that the weather makes it really bad for drone operators. There's a lot more fog. There's it's a lot more gray. It's a lot harder to attack people with drones. Now there's less places to hide in the winter. But in the wintertime, it's basically a very big cluster. Like it's very hard for drones. So it's kind of like evens out. So that's why you see some attacks in the wintertime, as we saw this year as well. Now in the springtime, it's the opposite. In the springtime, the weather's getting better, but there's still not a lot of growth in the trees and in the forests and everything where you could hide. So drones could fly very easily, but there's not good places to hide. So that's why the springtime it's very bad. Plus, there's like all the everything's in mud because it's a rainy season, but it's not that much of it because vehicles aren't really used that much in offensive actions anymore. But something to keep in mind. So we're probably not going to see a huge big push in the Ukraine until late April, early May, I would assume. We're going to still see things attacking, but only small parts. And yeah. So one thing I want to do in this video, I guess, is I'm going to go to each sector of the front. I'm going to talk about what happened there, and then I'm going to talk about what the plans are for the Russians and the Ukrainians. So let's talk about the Zaporizhia Dnipropetrovsk direction, and as we always begin there. Now, in the Zaporizhia Dnipropetrovsk direction, there's the Ukrainian offensive has basically slowed down, and again, like I mentioned last video, the main offensive action is now trying to attack the Berezova-Vishana line. I described why the Ukrainians want to take this, but it seems like not only have the Ukrainians been stopped, they're now being slowly pushed back. Now that they're not being fully pushed back yet, they're still holding on to positions around this area. But again, it's it seems like the Russians are going to kick them out sooner or later. Now. Right now, we had, for example, what I meant by that is that, for example, we had a video of the Russians attacking the town of Verbovo, which a lot of mappers said that the Ukrainians took, which is a village between Berezova and Vishana, and we had the Russians entering it and clearing out or capturing a Ukrainian soldier here. I'm trying to expand my information sources to have some more Ukrainian sources, just so I have an idea of what the Ukrainians are saying, so I'm not just following I've been always trying to have I have a mixture of sources, but I am pro-Russian, so I do follow more pro-Russian sources. I'm trying to have but I've been expanding my ratio a little bit to have more, I've had Ukrainian sources before, but I'm trying to get more of them to get a better idea of what they're thinking. And one of their sources is saying they control about 15% of the town of Vishana, and then the other part is, they say a gray zone, but that probably also means there's Russian troops there. Again, both the Russians and Ukrainians do kind of blemish their record here a little bit. So, despite the Ukrainians sort of saying that only 15% of Vishana is under their control, means that Vishana is mostly under Russian control. And so we also had a video, for example, of the Russian getting bombed in the southern part of Ternova, which was captured by the Ukrainians. So that shows that the Russians are re-entering it. And so, as you can see, there's this. It seems like the Ukrainian offensive has halted, and now it's just going back and forth. It's very fluid here. So we had a video of but the Russians are saying this is an archive video of a Ukrainian a vehicle entering Novy Igorivka before he got blown up. So Ukrainian sources are trying to show how much they've captured all this and everything, but again, it's Russian sources are saying that they're like bypassing strongholds and just trying to like go as fast as they can to the rear and disembarking people, which is a fair strategy. But we don't, that vehicle probably did explode because the Russians are still fighting in Berezovichan and Verbova, and whoever got disembarked there got cleared probably pretty easily. That's the downside of trying to bypass strongholds, is that if you don't clear them instantly, then the idea is that if you go behind them, maybe you collapse the lines, but if they don't collapse, then you're stuck behind enemy lines, and then you could get removed. A lot of sources are saying the Ukrainians are still pushing in this area right here after clearing the Russians from this kind of like northern kind of area. And a lot of sources are saying the Ukrainians are fighting for the town Dnipropetrovsk and Dnipropetrovsk. This source says that Dnipropetrovsk has fallen to the Ukrainians, and Dnipropetrovsk is still being fought over. We don't have any geolocations anywhere here yet, but this is a place where it looks like the Ukrainians are trying to cross the river and put pressure here. But so far nothing so good here for the. So far, we're still getting confirmation of what's happening in this area right here. Now, in this other area, this is like the kind of the Dnieper area. Now, if we go to more to the Zaporizhia area, this is actually where the Russians are making a lot of good progress, actually. And this week, we actually had multiple geolocations of the Russians being in the town of Rizhdanivka. I thought, they claimed they captured this town, but I thought that was a bunch of baloney. I'm like, no way have they done that. But not only did we actually had two geolocations, one in the southern part here, and then one in like kind of the more eastern part here. And so now obviously it's like, well, have they obviously this is probably more DRG activity, and it's like probably a precarious situation. One thing, my theory is that what happens is that they send troops into a village, and then if the troops don't are able to enter the village and then like set up shop in like a building, they claim they take it, especially for smaller villages, because it's like so. But the thing is that there could still be Ukrainian troops hiding in a basement. We don't know. It's just, again, it's very fluid. But we had sources showing that Rizhdanivka has Russian troops in it. Now, regardless if it's under full Russian control, as Russians claim, or it's just there's troops there, it does show that the Russians have like a very good position here. And we had a geolocation of the Russians being in the southern part of Ternavata. And from those Ukrainian sources I've been reading, they actually say, yeah, there's like some Russian soldiers still in Ternavata. They claim that they control most of Ternavata, but there's still Russian people hiding in the southern part. So again, it's so it looks like Ternavata is still being contested. So this area in this northern part, this was where the second axis of the Ukrainian attack came from, and it seems like it's actually been completely stopped, and now they're being pushed back. And now that it looks like the Ukrainians aren't going to break through towards Uspenivka or harm the logistics line here, it seems like the Russians are in a good position to continue advancing here. So very good news for the Russians here. If they could consolidate around Ternavata and Rizhdanivka, the idea obviously is to then they're probably going to attack towards Versatertia soon, and then encircle the main Ukrainian big defense here in Vosademka here. And so if the Russians could capture something like this, they'll be in a very good spot. And then obviously then the only downside is that then the Ukrainians in this northern part will be able to attack them from the north, so they'll have to like defend their northern part as they continue advancing westward. But my guess is that the idea is that they're going to continue. The Russians are going to try to stop, continue pushing the Ukrainians back to their pre-offensive lines here, and we shall see how that goes. And then a more southern part here is that, I don't know if I mentioned this, but they announced they took the town of Girki. We had the Russians waving flags here, but it might have been DRG activity. But we had like some 2 or 3 geolocations of the Russians being in these fields to the west of Zilazishnya here. We had a geolocation of the Russians being all the way right here. We had a geolocation of the Russians being in the south here. So it looks like these like fields that are between Zilazishnya and Giliopolsky, this area right here, which just has a ton of trenches, because again, this is facing the where the front line has been for like years now. So there's a bunch of trenches here, which expected a direct assault from the south here. So the Russians are just clearing these trenches and occupying these strongholds in these fields here. Now, how much of them are like fully secured? How much of them are just like they send like 2 or 3 troops there, and then like they hide in a trench system? Who knows? But it does look like they're slowly but surely entering Giliopolska. They've been balling this place pretty heavily. And so, yeah, the main obviously goal here is to take Gulipolska, probably Shervana here as well, and then this would protect their southern flank as they attack Versa Tersa. Again, as you can see there, once they do that, then they'll have a kind of more straightened front line, and then from here, the Russians will then move towards the town of Ravinia, Dolinivka, Kopany, and Novoselivka, and then as they do that, then they'll get closer and closer to the highway that supplies Orekov. So there's that, and then more in the Zaporizhia direction itself. This is where the Russians were advancing, but then the Ukrainians were counterattacking. But it seems like now it's just kind of like a big struggle back and forth, like it is in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. What most mappers and people are saying is that the Russians and Ukrainians are battling over the northern part of Primorska, in Leukemia. And that there's actually Russian troops still holding on to Novokalinovo. So it's like this very it's like, how are the Ukrainians in charge of Leukemia, but the Russians are here? It's just very fluid. And then some sources are saying that mostly Ukrainian sources are saying that the Ukrainians re-entered Stepanhursk and have reoccupied some northern positions here. I haven't seen any geolocation of that, but that's just something to keep in mind. So this area, again, what the Russians have to do is hold on to this kind of area right here, and try to from here then advance to try to envelop Orekov from the west here. But obviously the Ukrainians know that's a bad idea, so they're trying to counterattack here. So lots of things happening here in the Zaporizhia Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Now, what the goal is, obviously, now the thing with most of these, the thing is, I don't have plans here. I don't know what's the exactly going to happen. But one thing to keep in mind is that I'm just kind of basing it off on like what would make logistic sense, what would make strategic sense based on the big strategic objectives for the Russians, what would make operational sense based on past experiences. But also, again, things could happen that I have no idea how to predict. Like, for example, like when the Ukrainians invaded Kursk, maybe they invade Bryansk. I don't know. Like, I don't have like some special plan. Like, for example, I didn't know the Ukrainians would attack in Zaporizhia. I mean, I thought that was a possibility, but so the goal obviously is to obviously I'm not privy to any like thing, but again, this is just my guesses on like what I think the goal is. So for the Russians here, the main goal is to reach what I call the Orekov Novomykolaievka line here, pushing through here, and basically trying to have the front line go something. Well, actually, let me redraw it here. And again, this would link up the Vostok and Dnieper fronts, as they call them in Russian. But yeah, something like this. And if the Russians could take something like this, then they'll be in a very good spot to continue pushing towards Zaporizhia. I actually would probably guess they'll probably push beyond this, try to if we scroll down a little bit, probably take push down here if they can as well, probably towards Kolmashovaka. And I think because of this Ukrainian offensive, and because they sent most of their like big, strong assault units to this area, a lot of them at least, that the Russian push here is going to be a lot slower. But we're talking about the whole 2026. So I do think that in terms of 2026, they'll be able to take the Orekov Novomykolaievka line and push beyond that a little bit. And though at the beginning of this year, my guess was that they would actually reach Zaporizhia city and actually put it under siege. But I think that because of the slowdown in operations of this offensive and the Ukrainians redeploying troops here, is that I don't think they're going to siege Zaporizhia this year. I think that'll be a 2027 thing. But I do think they're going to take a huge chunk of Zaporizhia Oblast and, take Orekov, take Novomykolaievka. And the goal probably will be then to have everything in position so that in 2027 they could then begin the siege of Zaporizhia, and that'll be like the main focus for everyone. So that's the goal for the Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk fronts. Now we're going to go to the Dobropillya direction, and in this area we actually have not that much changes, but one big battle that's been going on throughout all the wintertime has come to the end. The biggest thing in the Dobropillya direction is that the Russians have completely captured the town of Grishny here. We had geolocation of the Russians being in the northern part, and even Ukrainian sources are saying that they've that they've left. Now, what Ukrainians are saying is that they're still trying to hold on to this like northern streets. A lot of things. One thing Ukrainians like to do is do these these attacks where they hold on to the most northern houses as much as they can to deny that Grishny has fallen. It's for propaganda purposes. But yeah, so before the battles, so the Russians have taken like the central and northern part of Grishny before they were just in the southern part. So very good news for the Russians. Along with this, they have captured a ton of these fields that are between the town of Rodinsky and Grishny, these areas right here. These were being contested, but it seems like they now have fallen. I still don't know the status of this mine here. I have no clue why the Russians have not taken it yet. A lot of sources are saying this is like where the Ukrainians have held up, and it's just very hard for the Russians to dislodge them. I don't know why they have not been able to, but I mean, I don't know. Like maybe some Russian sources are saying they have taken it, but Ukrainian sources are saying that they're still holding on to here. But we don't have any geolocation or any like big something to prove that that either. So, but my guess is they control this, but we still don't know. And this other mine, which we actually had a geolocation of the Russians being right on the outskirts of it a few like 2 weeks ago or so. Now, I do think this mine is under Ukrainian control, but this is another mine where the Russians will probably try to take, and also the Russians will probably continue pushing this area, try to take the towns of Nova Alexandrivka and Vasilivka here. And once they do that, the Russians will then maybe continue probably push along this rail line here towards the town of Sigurivka, and then probably also push maybe towards. They might stop in this area right here, and then from here try to then develop an offensive. Probably during those again once there's more cover. So once these like tree line, because right now these like tree lines and everything are just empty, so it's very hard if you want to advance from Rodinsky and Grecian towards the town of Shinktevko. You're basically moving across fields that are empty, and you're going to be attacked by drones. And so, but when this is all in bloom, there's like greenery everywhere. It's going to be easy for Russians to like hide troops in these like kind of tree lines, and then infiltrate Shinktevko. Now, another thing they're going to be doing is trying to envelop it from the north here as well. And we see this happening in Belitsky. We actually had a geolocation of the Ukrainians trying to attack Russian positions by, they said they were clearing them in the southern part of Belitsky. So it shows that the Russians are in Belitsky, but again, that video basically showed the Ukrainians retaking positions here. So, it shows that the Russians are battling for Belitsky, but we don't know the exact confirmation. It seems like maybe they're in the southern part, but we still don't know, like, what exactly is the confirmation of where are the Russians in control? Is it just DRGs? We don't know. But again, they really need to take Belitsky because this will be the forward operating base to take the rest of these villages that are to the south of Dobropillya. My guess is that the Russians will probably try to envelop something to try to take this mine, because if they can take this mine shaft, with this high ground Tarragon and the mine shaft here, they'll be able to cut off Belitsky and take it. So if they could take this mine shaft and Belitsky, this will give them a very solid forward operating base, and to continue pushing into Chernivka towards the smaller Dobropillya, and then obviously from the south they'll try to infiltrate Shemchenko. Again, the main point will be trying to capture a bunch of these villages that are to the south of Dobropillya and towns. Now, that's basically all. And then also just more on what's actually happened in the Dobropillya direction. The Russian sources are saying that the Russians are moving along these fields, taking more and more of these tree lines to move towards the town of Sigurivka from positions in the Obdachina mine shaft here, which is where they're accumulating forces. And so, so it looks like they're moving towards Sigurivka. So there's that, and then there's been no real changes in the Novomykolaivka or Novopavlovka area. We just had another geolocation of the Russians being in these fields to the north, between Ivanovka and Novopavlovka. Okay, now in terms of what the Russian goal is for Dobropillya. Now, one thing that again, let's talk about Dobropillya. Now, the thing about Dobropillya is that they're gonna, again, the main goal is Dobropillya, and the main goal here will be to, again, encircle. So I mentioned that the Russians are gonna try to take something like this, take the villages here, but again, they can't just attack Dobropillya directly. It's very hard to. So what they're going to try to do, again, they're going to also push through here, and then once this is overgrown with trees and overgrowth and everything, they'll be able to advance from here towards where they broke through before, and take Zolotol Kotatsky, and then cut this highway that connects Dobropillya to Kramatorsk, capture these villages and such. And then they're going to then advance on Dobropillya from this area and towards the town of Bilozarisky here. And in the meantime, also, I believe the Russians will then advance towards, there's this river here that kind of straddles along the Donetsk-Dnipropetrovsk border here. And I do think they're going to advance in these two directions here and reach these villages here. and then also they'll be able to have Sigurivka here, and then again the goal is to then then attack up this river up here, and then try to attack Dobropillya from multiple directions, and then take it, and then probably also try to take the town Bilozerska here. Bilozerska is going to be kind of like the Radinsky of Dobropillya, so they might take Dobropillya, but Bilozerski is going to be harder to take because it's going to be a lot. The Ukrainians will be able to supply it easier because it's not going to be encircled as much. So this will probably be battled over deep into the year. But again, probably the main goal for the Russians for the 2026 campaign. Also, for here, I could see, from what I'm guessing here, is the Russians are also trying to create positions to. I wouldn't be surprised, again, if the Russians are going to try to maybe improve their positions on the flanks here. And in order to do that, as they advance west, is to take the town of Slavyansk and Mezova in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Now, I don't know if they're going to do that, but I do know that probably, well, not do know, but this is probably my guess is what in terms of a small scale thing, this is what I think they're going to try to take this year. And then if you expand that, probably try to take something like this, the Novopolka, Mezova, Slavyansk line. So, if we take kind of the bigger position of what the Russians might want to do, is to take something like this. So as you can see, this again pushes the front line forward and makes it where you still kind of have a singular front, and that is just again the main purpose of this is to continue cutting off the logistics of the Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkovka defense line, which is the main defense line for the Ukrainians in Donbass. And then also in the Dnipropetrovsk area itself, I could see that once they take this, that maybe in 2027, the main goal here, again, as they push towards Zaporizhia, if they want to protect their northern flank here as they push towards Zaporizhia, they're going to need to clear out a bunch of these areas here. Again, the Ukrainians were able to use Pokrovsky and Velika Milikaevka to attack, to do this offensive. So if they want to protect their flank here, I do think that one of the main goals for the Russians will be to try to take, the towns of Prozny, Chapley, and then try to, again, Pokrovsky, Velika Milikaevka. And again, if you kind of combine it with what I think they're going to try to do in the Zaporizhia direction, I think the Russians are going to try to do something like this. Try to capture this area. And then, and if possible, they probably want to maybe push a bit more further north, if they can, towards Petropavlovka, Sharkarsky, and here. So if they want to create a very good, kind of, how do you say it, kind of a defense zone in the kind of a buffer zone in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast to protect their gains in the Zaporizhia and Donbass, this is something what I think they're going to do. So, and again, now you might be saying, well, what are the Ukrainian plans for all this thing? So the thing is that the main thing with the Ukrainians is that their goal is to counterattack to slow down the Russians and to make sure that they, the goal isn't to retake something. The goal is to make it where they could take something where it makes it where the Russian offensive operations is very hard to continue. That's the goal. So, I wouldn't be doubting that the Ukrainians try to do an attack in the Pokrovsk area. Alrighty, now we're going to do in the Kostyantynivka direction, and this week the Russians are just slowly, most of the things are happening in the southern part now, and it seems like they're slowly but surely just entrenching better, and we've had a huge amount of bombing campaigns around in the southern part of Kostyantynivka, literally reducing it to ruin. Most mappers, even neutral mappers, are saying that the towns of Stepanovka, Berostok, even Ilinivka, no, not fully captured, but most sources are saying most of Ilinivka is under Russian control. And also this agricultural college here. And as you can see, Russians are saying there's now DRG activity happening, all over this area here. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the Russians are preparing a massive offensive into Kostyantynivka. Because, again, now the reason why they're doing a big offensive at Kostyantynivka in the springtime is because it doesn't really matter about there not being trees and overgrowth where you could hide in, because you have the entire city of Kostyantynivka you could hide in. So you could actually attack here during the springtime and not have to wait till the summertime to attack. And so, I do think that we're going to see the battle for Kostyantynivka very much explode here, and again, so in terms of what the goal is for the Russians in this area, I do think the main goal here will be to push up towards the town of Druzhkovka, obviously take Kostyantynivka, take Alexandro Druzhkovka here, and probably take something like this. this will probably be the Russian goal, and probably flatten the front line with Russian positions as they try to envelop Dobropillya from the north here. But again, they'll probably push something like this, and then next year it'll be, in the winter of 2026, 2027, we're gonna be talking about the siege of Driskovka. That's probably what we're gonna be thinking about. So we shall see how that develops, but that's probably the goal. But again, nothing much has happened in the Kostyantynivka direction. Just the Russians are hugely bombing the southern part. They've secured themselves in Berostok, Yelinivka, Stepanovka. I wouldn't be surprised if the next goal is to take Dolfoga and probably also continue pushing, taking this area. And just, again, they're making a massive push, and I think, and we shall see how that develops there. In the Slavyansk direction, there's actually this is an area where the Russians are making a lot of good progress here as well. The biggest thing, is in the southern part here. Again, the main goal here is to encircle Ray Alexandrivka for this operational goal, and they've been doing a lot of good stuff here. We had a geolocation of the Russians having captured Glubovka, and now it's just a matter of, well, how much of this area between these villages of Prilila, Glubovka, and Minkivka up to the Sovietsky Donetsk Canal have they taken? Because there's a bunch of trenches. There's a bunch of trenches on the other side here, but there's so it's just a matter of like how much area in this area has the Russians occupied. Some Russian sources are saying they took everything up to the canal here. Some Ukrainian sources are saying this is still a contested zone. So, but again, taking these villages is very good. We had another big most geolocations coming from the town of Fedorova Durova here. We had geolocation of the Russians being in the southern part here, in this area here. They haven't announced they've captured it yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're about to capture Fedorova Durova and such. We also had most sources are saying that between like Minkivka, Privilia, and Nikiforivka, this area right here is being cleared by the Russians. And so, as you can see, this kind of entire, and also along with this, we had, last week we talked about how the Russians broke through and entered Lipka here, and most Russian sources are saying the Russians are now about to fully control Nikiforivka, and that only this like northern part has like maybe some Ukrainian sources, but a lot of Russians are saying they're about to be kicked out here. So as we can see, there's been a lot of big progress in the southern part of the Slavyansk direction. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Russians, consolidate here, and again, this allows them to approach Ray Alexandrivka from the south here. Along with now, in order to take Alexandrivka, they're going to have to improve their positions in the north here. And this week, there's not been that much changes in terms of breaking the Krylovka-Kalinivka line. This is where the Ukrainians are holding up, and there's been no progress for the Russians here. But the Russians are going to consolidate in the south here and wait for the Russians in the north to clear out this area right here, so that then they can attack Ray Alexandrivka on multiple directions and finally take it. And then this will be the new base of operations. Now, in terms of where they have made progress in this northern part of the Slavyansk direction is this area. Most sources are saying that the town of Rizhdanivka has been completely captured by the Russians, and they just had to take the most western part yet. And now the most geolocations have shown that in the southern part of Rizhdanivka, like everything up to here, is being captured by the Russians. So these fields between Rizhdanivka and like Nikiforivka is being cleared as well. So slowly but surely the Russians are pushing. Just they have to take Krylovka and Kalinivka and then take Ray Alexandrivka. So now, in terms of what the big goal for the Russians here is, I don't think the Russians are, again, this is the most well-defended area of the Donbass, probably the most well-defended area in all of Ukraine. And so, you might be thinking, like, well, maybe they just continue advancing towards Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. The thing is that this entire area on the other side of the canal here, up until, is like just full of trenches. It's so hard. But again, I don't attack directly, at least when I think so, but a lot of times the Russians have. My guess is that the Russians obviously will take Alexandrivka, and I also think Mykolaiivka. I think they're going to try to take Mykolaiivka and use that as like a drone operating base to send drones towards Slavyansk and Kramatorsk and, bomb logistics for these areas. I don't think they're going to continue pushing towards these areas, but maybe they will. I don't know. But but again, I think the main goal isn't to attack them directly. I think the Russians are going to try to make it where the logistics of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk is cut off, and that's what's happening in this Dobropillya area, and or make more restricted. And then just as they restrict it and attack it from the flanks, they make the defense of these cities a lot harder to do. And I think the main goal for the Russians in the Slavyansk direction is to just reach Mykolaiivka and kind of reach the reach the Sovietsky Donetsk Canal, take Mykolaiivka, Alexandrivka, and then use these areas to use artillery and drones to bomb Slavyansk and Kramatorsk and reduce the defenses, reduce logistics, and make it hard here. But I don't think there'll be a direct attack. Alrighty, now we're going to go to the Lyman direction, and this week we actually had some very interesting progress in the northern part of Lyman. The biggest news is that the Russians have admitted that they have completely captured the town of Yarova here, and they actually also claim they took the town of Sontseva here. But again, this might, we had a geolocation of the Russians being here earlier, but it was being cleared by the Ukrainians. So now the Russians are saying that they have taken it, but maybe it might just be there's like 2 or 3 Russians here, we don't know yet. But again, if you look at pro-Russian sources, they say they've taken Sontseva and Yarova here. And so, this makes sense. We've had geolocations of the Russians being on the most eastern part of Slavyansk here. So very big news happening here. And so this northern part is being more and more secure. Again, Slavyansk is going to be a very good goal for the Russians here. But I think they're going to wait until they take Lyman to take it. Now, one of the biggest news that's happening in the Lyman direction is that they have capped up. We actually had geolocation of the Russians taking the central part of Dobropillya here. The central part here, and that only the most western part, this area along the rail line here, is under Ukrainian control. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Russians actually fully take Dobropillya very soon. And also along this, we've got geolocation of the Russians, entering this most northern part of Lyman here. So it looks like the Russians are now, they've cleared the southern part of Lyman, taking Dubrova or Zhaina, and entrenching in the most southern houses here. And so right now, I think they're securing themselves in Dobropillya, Yarova, Sontseva, and are slowly but surely going to try to, we saw the Russians entering the most northern part of Lyman here, and once they do that, once they have all this going on, then they'll do a massive attack on Lyman and try to take it here. And now, in terms of the goal for the Lyman direction, is that again, now the main thing, this is kind of connects with like the Kupyansk direction as well a little bit, is that the main goal obviously is to take Lyman and then obviously push the Ukrainians to the other side of the Oska River. Now, I don't think the Russians are going to try to cross it. I mean, maybe they might, but again, if they cross it and try to like maybe establish a bridgehead in like this area right here, for example, it's going to, the Russians will have to like, supply their troops by river, and the Ukrainians will be able to attack them very easily. Now, the other thing is that, but I do think, again, the goals that, I do think Lyman's going to be taken this year, like, for sure. And then, again, if they could reach the Oska River, and then once they take Lyman, I do think maybe what they'll do next is then, reach the Borova area, and then attack Borova from the south here, and then try to liquidate this pocket here. So then, again, the goal is to take Borova, and then push Ukrainians to the other side of the Oska River here as well. And then also, then once Borova is taken, then I think they're going to then, once they clear that up, they'll be able to then finally clear out this Kupyansk, East Kupyansk pocket here. Now, this kind of brings us to the Kupyansk direction in terms of like what the goal here is. Now, in terms of what's happening in the Kupyansk direction, there have not been that much changes. The biggest news is that we had another geolocation of the Russians being around in Kostyantynivka here, so just show that Kostyantynivka is probably under Russian control, as we mentioned. And we had a geolocation of the Russian and most mappers are saying that even Russian mappers are saying that these kind of fields here near Radivka and Moskovka are under Ukrainian control. So it does show that Ukrainians are still putting the squeeze on Russian positions in Kupyansk. So it's just a big again, there's still Russian troops like holding out in the western part of Kupyansk, but again, it's like they've been cut off for a long time. I'm wondering like how long can they fight without it's been a long time for the Russians fighting here. So very much a lot of big things are they're still holding out, which is very heroic. But I wonder how long they get to hold out here. But again, very but there's not been that much changes. Now, in terms of what I think they're going to do here, again, the goal is to clear out at least the East Bank here. Now, the other thing is that once they clear the East Bank, then it's going to be a lot more easier to supply and do a lot of these cross-river advances. And then what I believe is that they're going to try to do what they tried to do last year, but then got cucked, is to create a Kupyansk bridgehead here. And again, make it more secure than before. So, capture a bunch of these areas around Kupyansk, and then create a bridgehead on the other side of the Oska River. And the goal of this, I believe, is to then advance across the river towards the Savetsky Donetsk River that goes here. And this kind of links up with what's happening in the Kharkov direction. Now, there's not been that much changes that happened in the Kharkov direction. The only thing that's changed is that the Russians have claimed they've taken the village of Krylovka here, this village right here, But besides that, nothing much has changed here. Now, the main thing for, I think, in this Kharkov direction is I think that this is a place where the Russians can have a lot of interesting things happening. I do think the Russians will continue pushing south along the river here. I do think the Russians are going to try to advance towards Velika Baru from their bridgehead here. I do think, and then I also think from Kupyansk they'll also try to advance here. And so the main goal here, I believe, is that they're going to try to connect this Kupyansk bridgehead and then create this huge land bridge in this northern part here. Now I know this is a huge amount of land, but I do think, I think one of the big goals of the Russians is to try to take what I call the Shentenko-Kupyansk line. This protects their western flank with the river, the Sovietsky Donetsk, and also it then allows for the Russians to have a overland bridge to then begin their attacks southwards towards Izium, which I think will be for next year. But again, I think that's probably the goal, is to clear out the east bank of the Oskol and then clear out this kind of big area in the north here of Kharkov. So I think that is the goal for the Russians here. Now we're going to go to the Sumy direction, and I think the Sumy direction is what I call the distraction direction, because I think the Russians are going to push here, but only to drive Ukrainian forces away from the main offensive, which is in Zaporizhia and Donbass. So I do think that the Russians are going to do some small-scale attacks here, which in the grand scheme of things is small, but they're going to only do it. It's going to be very slow here, but I do think that I think one of the main goals for the Russians is probably try to take the town of Krasnopilya here, or maybe they'll just continue doing these small little attacks here. But again, we actually had one of the biggest things in the Sumy direction that's happened these past 2 weeks, is that the Russians have expanded rapidly in this area. For example, they've taken a ton of more of these forest strips to the south of Pokrovka. They've taken this forest strip that's right in front of Stepuk, so I wouldn't be surprised if they announce they take Stepuk soon. They also announced that they've taken more and more of these fields to the south of Razny here, these areas right here. And so I wouldn't be surprised if right now the Russians are slowly but surely just pushing towards the town of Razny, toward Novoto and Dnipropetrovsk, take this area right here. And then the main goal here is to probably push towards Krasnopilya and then slowly but surely trying to encircle this town, and then, force the Ukrainians to pull their reserves to the Sumy direction. So, I also think maybe the Russians will continue trying to push towards the Khotan line here, this kind of Khotan defense, the second layer of defense here. We also see the Russians expanding their positions in in this area right here, so it looks like they're trying to drag Ukrainian forces here as well. For example, this week they captured the town of Stopsky here. This is actually a pretty decent-sized town on the border here. And also they've captured a bunch of these villages, like Chernozorovka, Bobolivka, this area right here. But I don't think these are even villages. I think these are no-name villages that have nothing. Yeah, there's on the map, there's nothing here. I think they're just on a village in name only. But anyway, they are at least they're trying to capture these forest strips on the border. And who knows? Maybe they're trying to expand, try to capture a bunch of this area here, just to maybe. I don't know. Maybe this is just another pressure point to force Ukrainian reserves towards Glubovka here to protect their defenses here. So but again, the whole purpose here is not to necessarily take anything operationally significant. It's just to do these tactical assaults across the border to take some important positions like Krasnopilya, maybe the Khotan defense line, so that the Ukrainians are forced to keep troops in Sumy, or even redirect troops towards Sumy, so that they can't help the Russians in Donbass and Zaporizhia and Kharkov. So that's the end of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. There's probably going to be another 2-week break because there's probably not going to be that much changes happening for the rest of March. But again, if there's a lot of things that happen in this next week, I'll definitely make another weekly video. But again, I will continue following this war as this develops. And I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. So be sure to subscribe to my channel to continue receiving these updates. Like this video, comment your thoughts, share this video around. And yeah, so aim high and wander on.